Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening to the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and I'm recording another episode today. And today's topic came from a Facebook Live that I was doing earlier. And I was talking about treks to Nepal, and I'd realized that I've done podcasts on, things you need to know about Everest Base Camp, Kilimanjaro, Machu Picchu, Mount Toubkal. But one that I've kind of not really done a great deal on is the Annapurna Circuit. And I'm making it a mission of mine to raise the profile more of the Annapurna Circuit and try and get more people to think about adding the Annapurna Circuit onto their bucket lists. So the title of my podcast today is going to be Things to Know Before Trekking the Annapurna Circuit. And for those who aren't so familiar with the Annapurna Circuit, it is a very similar trek to Everest Base Camp, but obviously Everest Base Camp takes much more of a higher profile than the Annapurna Circuit does. And personally for me, I think more people should be considering the Annapurna Circuit over an Everest Base Camp trek. And don't get me wrong, the Everest Base Camp trek is amazing, and I completely understand why it's on so many people's bucket lists. But I also think if you've already done Everest Base Camp, then you could be heading back to Nepal to do another trek in another area, in another region, and enjoying those amazing Himalayan views. Now, obviously, the attractions for the Annapurna Circuit over the Everest Base Camp trek is it's not a necessity to fly there. And obviously, we've done a podcast towards the tail end of last year where we were having issues with the weather and flights being cancelled, and people were actually turning around and heading down towards the Annapurna Circuit region because they weren't going to be able to complete an Everest Base Camp trek. So lots more people probably did the Annapurna Circuit last year, or some of it anyway, because again, they'd lost so many days waiting for flights to Everest Base Camp that they couldn't go and do all of it. So I know a lot of people went and did the Annapurna Base Camp trek, which is a shorter trek at less altitude, and a little bit more accessible maybe than the Annapurna Circuit. But the Annapurna Circuit ranges realistically. I mean, it is one of the world's top 10 best trekking routes, multi-day trekking routes. So it's certainly already a popular one. But obviously, as I said before, Everest Base Camp tends to take the priority. I mean, if I look at how many Annapurna Circuit treks we sell in a year compared to how many Everest Base Camp treks we sell, it's probably tenfold towards Everest Base Camp than it is Annapurna Circuit. But the trek can be between sort of 12 and 20 days long. And it goes through two districts, and the two districts are Manang and Mustang. Where in Mustang you can experience more so the Tibetan culture and lifestyle. And you're looking at between the duration, the trek can be from around 150 kilometers up to about 220 kilometers, depending on where you're starting and finishing your trek. So, I mean, our trek, for example, is exactly the same as an Everest Base Camp standard trek, 13 days. But you can extend it or shorten it a little bit from ours, but you can extend it if you want to. So like I say, the route options, I mean, obviously it's a circuit trek. So you walk around the Annapurna Massif. Obviously Mount Annapurna is a 8,000 meter peak, 8,091 meters. And it depends really where you're going to start from. But the reason why I like the Annapurna Circuit Trek is because it is a circuit. It's not an up and back trek. And having led lots of trips in Nepal, the biggest challenge, and I've said this before, one of the biggest challenges from a leader's perspective is keeping a group motivated on the way back from Everest Base Camp. The end goal for people tends to be Everest Base Camp. And obviously you walk up, you get to Everest Base Camp, and then you've got to turn around and you've got to come back again. And it's very hard for a leader to motivate the group to get them to come back down. Obviously, we don't have that on a Annapurna Circuit Trek because you walk all the way around it. So depending on where the route options are, you could start at Darapani and finish at Nayapal. That's the longest route. That one's about 260 kilometers. You can start at Charme and finish in Johnson, which is generally what we do on our trek, which is 136 kilometers. You can go from Manang, or you can also start from Jagat as well. So those are kind of your options. We go and finish in Johnson, and then from Johnson you can take a short flight then back to Pokhara, and that's the route that we generally do. What else can I tell you about it? There are some bumpy jeep rides on it that you need to do, depending again where you're starting and you're finishing the trek. So be prepared for some bumpy jeep rides. There are also there can be some long road walks as well, depending on which route you are taking. So do look into what route you're going to take, because nobody really wants to be walking for long periods of time on roads. That's not why you're going to the Himalayas to do these treks. So just do some research on the route. That don't just think I'm going to go do the longest route because I want to do the longest route, because you are going to end up walking on more roads than you need to. You don't need to have a guide. You can go without a guide. Obviously, I would advise always that you do have a guide. I would also advise that you have a porter that can carry your stuff for you as well. Obviously, that makes your trek, I feel, a whole lot more enjoyable. But also you are providing employment as well then at that point, which from a sustainability perspective is what we should be doing when we are visiting these countries. You will need to get a permit in the same way as on an Everest Base Camp trek. So you'll need to get a permit, and you'll also need your TIMS card. Your TIMS card is your Trekker's Information Management System card. That's the same if you're doing an Everest Base Camp trek or any trekking in Nepal. And you'll also, like I say, you need your permit as well. And that the permit for the Annapurna region is the ACAP, ACAP, which is the Annapurna Conservation Area Permit. Those you can get in either Pokhara or Kathmandu at the offices. And you'll need your passport. You'll be able to show your insurance, and you'll also need 4 photos as well to go on the permits and the cards. If you are going with a trekking agency, or you're booking a trip with a bucket list company or a company like ours, then we'll sort all your permits out for you anyway. So we'll deal with all that before we even get there. So you certainly don't have to worry about that. Best time to trek the Annapurna circuit, obviously, as you know, trekking Everest Base Camp, trekking the Annapurna region, there are 2 main seasons for trekking in Nepal. You've either got March, April, or May, or September, October, November. October tends to always be the busiest month, both for Annapurna circuit and for Everest Base Camp. So in the spring, what are you going to get? Well, you're going to get moderate temperatures and clear skies. The rhododendron forests are generally in full bloom. There's a chance that you're going to have snow on the Thorongla Pass. We've just got a group. We've just had a group out there, and they had a little bit of snow, but not too bad. And then you're going to get some occasional rainfall in the lower regions as well. Changes then for the autumn season. are going to be clear skies, warm days, cold nights. The pass, which is the highest point of the whole trek, is the highest trekking pass in Nepal, is usually snow-free in September to November. Because if you're going sort of early September, mid-September, the post-monsoon trails can still be a little bit muddy. But you are going to see a lot more of the festivals and things like that in the villages. You can trek it in the summer. I have done some trekking in that region in the summer before, but it is very warm, and you can have some very heavy downpours as well. There's also a lot of leeches about. Obviously, because of the amount of rain, that can cause landslides. It just becomes a real challenge to do it in that time of year. But, if you are a purist and you want completely quiet trails, then the chances are you are going to be one of the only people who are walking it at that time of year. So again, depending on what you want to do. Obviously, again, winter, December through to February, there's going to be a lot of heavy snowfall. Is a higher risk of avalanches. It's really cold, especially over the pass. The chances are that the pass could be completely impassable due to the snow. And you're going to need a lot more of equipment with you than you would need it if you were going in the two main trekking seasons. So just keep that in mind. So if you are wanting to head out, I would certainly advise March to May, September to November. But if you want it to be a little bit quieter, then potentially avoid October, which tends to be, as I said, the busiest time to go trekking in Nepal in general, really. Obviously, it can be cost effective to do the Annapurna Circuit Trek, depending on how you're looking to do it. Like I said, I would hire a guide. I would hire a porter. Obviously, if you're booking it with a trekking agency or you're booking it with a company like us, then you will have everything already planned for you. And I think, like I said before, it is important to have a guide with you to show you the way. But also as well, the challenge over the pass is a difficult challenge, and you certainly don't, from my personal opinion, don't want to be carrying all your own kit. So to have a porter with you as well, I think are two of the key things you really should consider if you're planning on doing it. Like I said before, you can do it independently. Obviously, owning a group travel company, it's not what we do. We do group travel, so you will be with a small group. Our groups for the Annapurna Circuit Trek tend to be quite small groups, generally because people want to trek Everest Base Camp, as I've said before. So we're not taking large groups on an Annapurna Circuit Trek. It might be 4, 6, 8. Those are the kind of sizes of our groups on an Annapurna Circuit Trek, which makes a really nice small group. Obviously, you'll have a couple of local guides with you. If it's a Bucket Lister Plus trip, you might have one of the UK guides with you, and then you'll have the porters there as well to be carrying all your equipment. Obviously, all the tea houses will be booked for you in advance. And then, obviously, with us, we include, the same as an Everest Base Camp Trek, all of the meals as well. So, we literally take care of everything for you on that one. As I said, all the tea houses will be booked. You will stay in tea houses the whole way through an Annapurna Circuit Trek. So there's no camping on it. You'll always be in a tea house. You'll eat and sleep in the tea house. So that's perfect. Other things to consider with an Annapurna Circuit Trek is be prepared for changing weather. It is a mountainous region. You are walking around, you are doing a circuit around the mountain. It's generally decent during trekking season, but like I said, you can still have snow. It can still rain during the season. We've got some amazing photos of one of our groups a few years ago trekking up through. I mean, the snow was quite, it was still quite late in the season, but it just made the most amazing scenery. So you just need to be prepared for that. And, again, before you're going out, just check the conditions of the pass. It might be that you need to buy micro spikes whilst you're in Kathmandu before you head down, because there's a lot, during the early spring season, if there is snow there and ice, you're going to struggle to get over the pass with just your boots on. So just take that into consideration, that you might, you don't necessarily need to take crampons out with you. But you can buy the micro spikes, which are perfectly adequate and will get you over the pass from Kathmandu. And that's generally the cheapest way of doing it. And again, if you're coming out with a group like us, we will already know the conditions of the pass. So if we need to, we will take you into Kathmandu, into Thamel, and go and get what you need before we make sure you've got what you need before we head out on the trek. I mean, going back to the pass, it's one thing that kind of stopped a lot of people in their tracks, really. The Thoronga Pass is the highest point of the trek. It sits at 5,416 meters, so it's higher than Everest Base Camp, and it is the most challenging part of the Annapurna circuit. So not only are you having to deal with the low oxygen, the high altitude, you're walking up a big hill, and making sure you're in as good a shape for that as possible before you go is highly advisable on that one. We do get a lot of people struggling on that day. Obviously, with it being a circuit trek, you've got to get over the pass. But once you get over it, you drop straight back down the other side. So if you are struggling a little bit with the altitude, very quickly, once you get to the top, you drop back down the other side really quickly. You lose the altitude. You should start feeling better quite quickly on that one. So just bear that in mind. The Annapurna Circuit Trek, I would say as well, is more culturally diverse than the Everest Base Camp Trek. And it's got a lot of cultural traditions on it. Obviously, the Nepalese people have a very strong faith and belief in their culture. It is a Buddhist country, so they can get offended, if you do something against their culture, Hindu or Buddhism, depending on where you are at that time. Obviously, like I said, when you're heading into Mustang, you're heading more into the Tibetan culture than you are the Nepalese culture. So, it's advised, I would advise people just to kind of respect the culture of the locals, and, try and learn a little bit about it. Obviously, the guides are there to tell you about that when you're on your trek. Again, the importance of having a guide with you, so you kind of know those things. Make sure you get a really good English speaking guide. You don't just want somebody that's showing you the way. You want to make sure that you can engage with that person and learn from that person and understand, everything that's going on around you. Like, that's what a guide is there to do on the trip. They're not just there to walk in front of you so you can follow them. I've seen so many groups in the past who have had a guide that there's kind of no interaction with them because they're just, their English isn't of a level where they can have those conversations. Like, the guides that we use speak very good English. They know a lot about the history, about the culture, and they can relay that onto them. And that's a big part for me about traveling is learning about different cultures, learning about the history of where you're going. It's not just about spending 12 to 20 days trekking. It's also about being part of that and also learning about it as well. So just bear that in mind as well. Other things is the Everest Base Camp route. They've been doing a great deal to deal with the rubbish and the waste management and the recycling. That's not so prominent in the Annapurna region. So make sure that you are carrying as much waste off as you can. Don't be throwing things on the floor. try and take a reusable water bottle with you, a refillable water bottle, like a water to go bottle. So we're not, buying plastic bottles of water, because they just haven't got the resource to recycle it and deal with it up there. So it's still very popular for them to burn plastic, which we're trying to educate them against that. But obviously, if we're not creating that plastic, then they don't need to do it. So just think about that whilst you're trekking up there. It's still got a little way to go to catch up with like the Everest Base Camp Khumbu region. So just bear that in mind. What should you take with you on an Annapurna Circuit Trek? Obviously, you want to take your phone with you. It's there as a brilliant camera these days. I very rarely take my big camera anymore on a trek because I can get just as good photos on a phone. So obviously there is Wi-Fi connection whilst you're on the Annapurna Circuit Trek if you want it, but you can just flick your phone into airplane mode and just use it as a camera and not connect with the outside world if that's what you're looking to achieve. Like I said, I would definitely take a couple of refillable filtered water bottles. And then that stops you from saves you money having to buy plastic bottles of water, but also helps with the environment as well. You'll need to take a sleeping bag with you. It will get very cold as the higher you get up. As again, with the tea houses, they tend to have blankets on the beds. I always say to people, I wouldn't sleep under the blankets, but I would use the blanket on top of my sleeping bag if I felt cold. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, you're going to need a great pair of walking boots to get you through the trek, enough socks and things like that, wicking layers, lots of layers. But the porters will generally carry between kind of 10 to 12 kilos for you. Anything else above that, you're going to have to put into your day pack. So you can really think about traveling as light as you can to make sure you can get in with your weight limit. Because like we finish at Johnson, and there is an internal flight to get back down to Puckera, so that has a weight limit on the plane as well to consider. So think about what your route is. Think about how many days you're trekking for, and think about if you are going to need to take a flight as well, then, because that's going to limit you to how much you can carry, how much you can take. As I said before, you will stay in what they call a tea house, which I would class as a basic guest house. They generally have a room, 2 beds, twin beds in it. The food will generally be a mixture of Nepalese, Chinese, Western food. There'll always be dal bat on the menu, which, the advantage of dal bat is they keep giving you dal bat. So if you order dal bat, which is what the porters and the guides will eat, they will keep filling your plate up, because they're always cooking that on the stove. If you order one of the Western options or, the Chinese options, that's what they're going to cook you and that's what you're going to have. But if you have a real big appetite and you like dal bat, then order the dal bat and you can have as many servings of it you like. And that's the same, wherever you're trekking in Nepal. Like I say, most of the tea houses have electricity. Some of them will have a hot water shower. Some of these you will need to pay for the showers, just in the same way as on an Everest Base Camp trek. But, after a couple of days, you will want to have a shower. Further lower down altitude wise, generally the facilities tend to be a lot better than what they are higher up. You have more choices of tea house and the facilities tend to be better. You might even have an ensuite bathroom in some of the tea houses, but the higher up you go, you tend to just have a room with 2 beds. Generally, the rooms are on the bottom floor and then they'll have the dining room on the top floor or vice versa. And they generally have a wood stove or a dung stove if they haven't got very much wood. They do burn a lot of yak dung. They dry it and then burn it, and it does give off a bit of a smell, but generally you can only smell it outside. Once you go outside the tea house, you can't smell it inside once it's in the fire. So that pretty much covers really the Annapurna circuit in things that I think you should know before thinking about taking on the Annapurna circuit. The only thing that I would add to that is you generally finish back in Pokhara, and Pokhara is such a lovely city right round the lake, that if you're planning your trip, think about spending a couple of days in Pokhara, because it's just kind of nice to wander around the lake, and it's got some nice bars and restaurants and like nice shops to buy souvenirs from, but completely different to what you've experienced whilst you've been on the trek. But also I think Pokhara is so different to Kathmandu that for me, like, I enjoy Kathmandu and the hustle and the bustle of Kathmandu, but obviously Kathmandu is a very polluted city in terms of the amount of vehicles and all of that goes with that. But once you hit to Pokhara, it's almost completely free from pollution compared to Kathmandu. Like I say, you can enjoy the views of the lake. When I was there last year, I went paragliding over the lake, which was just amazing. So if you have got a few days to spare when you get back off your trek, then I would advise spending a few of those days in Pokhara before heading back to Kathmandu. It's just a really nice, enjoyable place to be. Again, you can, if you want to, you can fly back from Pokhara to Kathmandu. The flights generally don't get affected like they do on an Everest Base Camp trek, just because of what you're flying through. It's more of a direct flight path. You're not going through the mountains so much as you are on a flight to Lukla. So if you want to avoid the long drive back from Pokhara to Kathmandu, then you can opt to have a short hop internal flight, which is only about 20 to 25 minute flight. It's really quick. So again, if you wanted to spend a bit more time in Pokhara, then you could maybe look at doing a flight rather than taking the drive back, and that would almost give you a whole additional day in Pokhara if you wanted to, because it would take, it's about a 6-7 hour drive to get from Pokhara back to Kathmandu. So that's the reason, and those things I've discussed on this podcast today are why I think you should consider adding the Annapurna Circuit Trek to your bucket list. And hopefully, of those 10 things that I've gone through about what you should know before you head out onto the Annapurna Circuit Trek. And I think the Annapurna Circuit Trek is for, you can consider it if you've maybe already been to Nepal and trekked in the Khumbu region towards Everest Base Camp. If you fell in love with Nepal and you want to go back, then you should seriously consider going back and going into that region and doing some trekking in that region. And likewise, if you've never been trekking in Nepal before, and maybe you like a slightly quieter trek with less people around you, then you may want to think about the Annapurna Circuit Trek for you for that. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I hope you found it useful. I really think that more people should be promoting the Annapurna Circuit Trek, and I want to see it not get overly busy, because obviously that's not what we want. But I think it just deserves a little bit more credit than maybe it gets, because a lot of people do head out to the Khumbu and into an Everest Base Camp trek. So what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to our trip on the Everest Base Camp, and I'll also put a link to the podcast I did with Dave, where he talks through the route and everything in a little bit more detail than what I've gone into today from the trip that we do. So like I said, I hope you found this episode interesting, useful, and I'll be back again next week with another episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. So until then, thank you very much, and good night, or good afternoon, or good morning. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.